215. Laissez-Faire. Chalcedon Report number 129, May 1976. It amazes me as I travel how many people who are Christians will attack the idea of laissez-faire as though it represents some pagan abomination. Not only that, but they mistakenly assume that modern corporate structures are dedicated to laissez-faire when, in fact, with a very few exceptions, most are intensely hostile to it. What is involved in the doctrine of laissez-faire, the idea of built-in laws which ensure that freedom will produce the best results? What lies behind the, quote, invisible hand, end quote, doctrine? Laissez-faire is a secularized form of the biblical doctrine of providence. The Bible makes it clear that God is sovereign Lord and Creator, and that His law and predestinating counsel absolutely governs all things, so that all creation moves, not in terms of chance or chaos, but in terms of God's master plan. Faith in this plan and purpose means that it is not man's plan, but God's which must govern reality. The consequences of such a faith as developed by such a medieval thinker as Bishop Orem were the theoretical foundations of classical economics. Modern man, however, wanted the consequences of God's being and government, but not God himself. As a result, the modern era shifted the emphasis from biblical law to natural law, and from providence to laissez-faire. In writing about laissez-faire, 18th century thinkers were, in essence, reformulating the doctrine of providence to gain the full effect of God without acknowledging God openly. Their adoption of this doctrine of providence and their emphasis on it made for a tremendous input of social energy and vitality as men proceeded to act in the economic realm and elsewhere in the assurance of an invisible hand which provided a total and absolutely providential government. However secular their interest, their work was a major theological development in Western thought. Its ties to the Reformation doctrine of God's sovereignty and decree were very strong, however humanistic the framework of their concern. Laissez-faire gave men a freedom from church and state, and from the law of institutions, in the name of a higher law. It thus developed to an unprecedented degree the implications of the doctrine of creation. The Church had too often sought to act as the invisible hand of God in a presumptuous manner, and the state had surpassed the Church in playing the role of manifest providence. Laissez-faire placed the institutions in the background and gave the ultimate and active workings of providence priority. The social implications of this were far-reaching, and the growth created thereby dramatic in its historical consequences. Laissez-faire, however, collapsed because of its humanistic framework. The logic of humanism continued to develop the implications of its separation from the doctrine of God. This meant that the doctrine of creation had to be dropped. Hegel developed the concept of social evolution, and Darwin applied it to biology and the sciences. With Darwin's acceptance, laissez-faire became an obsolete doctrine. The world of Darwin is a world of chance, a world of meaningless and brute factuality in which whatever develops does so accidentally rather than in terms of a cosmic plan. Social Darwinism could mean a ruthless economic individualism, not laissez-faire, as in Andrew Carnegie, but there is no law beyond man to govern him. It can lead to economic interventionism and socialism, as in the Rockefellers and others, but again, it is a human decision, not an aspect of a cosmic plan. In a meaningless universe, there is no invisible hand, and laissez-faire means a senseless chaos. The implications of Darwinism were quickly grasped. Men like John Stuart Mill moved from laissez-faire into socialism, because no doctrine of providence was possible in our Darwinian worldview. But men cannot live without a doctrine of providence. The idea of predestination is an intellectual necessity, because the alternative is a world of total chance and meaninglessness. The doctrine of laissez-faire had shifted the government and decree from God to nature, while tacitly retaining all the forms of the theological formulation of the doctrine. With Darwin, a further transfer took place. Now the state, or with libertarians, anarchistic man, became the source of providence and predestination. The result has been the rise of socialism and economic interventionism. Social planning and control mean that the state now issues the decree of predestination. The providential government of all things has become a function of state, and churchmen solemnly approve of this blasphemy and condemn the mild departures which Laissez-Faire represented. Not surprisingly, we are in the midst of a major theological decline and collapse because the heart of the doctrine of God has been transferred to the state. Sovereignty and control now belong to an institution of man, and scientific socialism logically calls for the total control of man. This includes not only economic control, but genetic control and engineering. Even as Scripture, because of the fall, calls for the recreation of man in Jesus Christ, so too the modern sovereign, the state, calls for the remaking of man by scientific engineering. Man must be changed from God's creation into the state's creation, and this change is necessary in order to establish the state's sovereignty, so that we can expect more and more emphasis on the remaking of man by science and the state. Despite its serious defects, Laissez-Faire had as its great virtue the fact that it did concentrate on the doctrine of providence. Its failure was that it could not maintain the doctrine of providence without the sovereign and absolute God. On the other hand, the Church has not been able to defend its doctrine of God when it has abandoned implicitly the doctrine of providence. As a result, the Church condemns itself to impotence. It clings formally to doctrines it castrates in fact. It affirms predestination by God and bows down to the predestination by Caesar, by the state. Where are the theologians who are discussing the implications of the doctrines of creation and providence in terms of the realities of everyday life, in terms of economics, politics, and all things else? The answer is that, outside of Chalcedon, they are almost non-existent. Is it any wonder that we are in trouble? Can we affirm providence without far-reaching personal, social, economic, and political consequences? Can we believe in the God of Scripture without such consequences? The consequences of our day are those of humanism in church and state, in economics, politics, education, and theology. Until we begin to think theologically, the consequences will not change. Are you with us?